Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, joined today by Mr. Michael Morris, and let's get into the news of today. So this was an opinion piece by Peter Bruce, and I have been very critical of Peter Bruce in the past, particularly during his brief Ramaphosa period. But I think that this opinion piece he's written is really good because it gets to the heart of something which is not acknowledged enough in our public debate. And I think there's a lot of things that he says here. He talks about the title of the piece is "The More It Fails, the More We Sing from It." And I think this is in Business Live. The thing he's referring to as us singing from it is the Patel-Ramaphosa songbook. But the emphasis here is on Minister Ibrahim Patel, who has been in the cabinet since 2009 and has been the architect of so many different failed policies. Peter Bruce points out in this thing recently, the Competition Commission and Ibrahim Patel's influence has put forward a raft of new regulations for online retailers, mostly targeted at the website Takealot, instructing it to be fairer to small retailers, to do more to support Black business, to favor local Black-owned hotels. This is Google and Apple, to favor local Black-owned hotels and stores and products, to provide free advertising to people. And so let me just quote a little bit from here. Takealot, a roaring success, is now required, according to the Commission, to adjust its business model to be more fair to smaller retailers on its site, and is required to do more to support Black businesses joining the site by offering them expertise and financial discounts. It is interesting how the state manages this relationship with business. It routinely refers to the private sector as social partners, but routinely abuses it. So just as CEOs were getting ready to put their shoulders to the wheel again for the ANC government, the Competition Commission, a sharp policy weapon in the hands of Ramaphosa's most trusted cabinet colleague, Trade and Competition Minister Ibrahim Patel, ripped into pretty much all of the private sector's most recent new age digital businesses. And Michael, I really think that Ibrahim Patel is, in many cases, a villain who has been recognized in the story of South Africa's troubles over the last 10 years. I think that you can't completely divorce the fact that South Africa's economic fortunes began to turn around in 2009, just as Ibrahim Patel office. One of the other stats here that Peter Bruce has in his column is, for example, that manufacturing's contribution to GDP has fallen for 16 straight years. That's kind of a crazy number.
It's an astonishing number and very telling. And yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's a very good column. And to Peter's great credit, in recent months, at least, perhaps for the past year or so, he has been hammering home sort of very basic truths about how the economy works and what needs to be done. And I think this column is a model of that genre, if you like.
Yes.
He makes this point, the Patel-Ramaphosa songbook, which includes this magical sounding phrase, inclusive growth. And we hear this a lot from an awful lot of people actually who ought to know better, really. It's often struck me as quite funny, just as a side, that as a non-profit organization, we spend so much time addressing the profit sector and telling them what it is that their business really amounts to. What it amounts to is not inclusive growth, it's just doing their businesses as best as they can. That is what makes the biggest contribution to a country.
Exactly. It's actually very difficult to have non-inclusive growth. If you have economic growth, it will almost always inevitably be at least a little bit inclusive and generally very inclusive.
There we go. And Peter Bruce comments here that inclusive growth is one of those phrases that Ramaphosa tends to be very, very fond of. But he makes the point that once we ditch inclusive growth and once those CEOs at the presidential table, because that's really in a way his key target are the people who ought to know, and in fact in their secret lives as CEOs do actually know, you've got to make a profit, you've got to run your company properly, you've got to reward merit, you've got to focus on what actually matters. That's how you grow and that's how you contribute to an economy. He says once we ditch the inclusive growth and once those CEOs at the presidential table stop nodding every time he says it, we might.
Yes.
And that's actually we might actually get somewhere. And here's this little thing that he says: this is, just focusing on building the economy. And he says, let's call it transformation and growth, because that is reasonably what the government wants, is inclusive growth. What we really want is, growing the economy. It's much harder to say than inclusive growth, and much harder to do.
Right.
And that's really the thing. There's got to be plain talking in these jamborees with between the government and the ANC, between the government and businesses, especially the senior sort of CEOs, the senior people in the big companies, who after all depend on the economy functioning properly.
Exactly.
But they need to appreciate how many people depend on them, and that's all the rest of us. The entire country really depends on there being a rational, candid, open-hearted discussion about what policy works and what policy doesn't.
Exactly. And I think it's clear that Ibrahim Patel's policies do not work, and they have not worked. And what's so malevolent about his influence in particular is that I think that he is genuinely committed. I think he really believes most of the things that he implements. And I think that he's relatively good at doing it.
Yeah.
I just think they're really bad ideas, and
Exactly.
it's time for them to go.
And one of the awful things, in a way, which I think our alternative proposals bring out, is that there is actually a need for empowerment and for doing making corrective measures in the economy, which we spell out. That we are still living with the consequences of history because they simply haven't been dealt with properly in the past 30 years. What instead has happened is we had this inclusive growth that benefits people who are already rich and well off and well connected, and it's left the vast immiserated mass stuck with joblessness and the low economic figures that you mentioned.
Exactly,
really,
as Peter Bruce points out.
Yeah,
inclusivity is always reduced to simply race alone.
There we go.
Which is not really getting to the nub of the problem at all.
No.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic, and this is a denial from the South African Revenue Service, SARS, which was accused during the EFF's gala dinner by Julius Malema of meeting with President Cyril Ramaphosa to investigate the attendees of the EFF's gala dinner and sponsors. And sort of the implication here was that Cyril was going to use the tax service to destroy the EFF from behind the scenes. And my question to you, Michael, is why hasn't the government done that? Now, I'm pretty sure that if SARS went looking, they could find something there in the EFF's finances. It's always so, the EFF can bus thousands and thousands of people into the FNB stadium and can fill the thing up, and it has huge advertising campaigns, and it's got all this money sloshing about, and it can use helicopters during campaign events, and yet it says it survives almost entirely off of its relatively modest parliamentary stipend. It's a little bit suspicious. I don't know. Why do you think that SARS has kind of been a little bit slow to go after the EFF?
Yeah, it is worrying, and I think especially as the average taxpayer, I think has a distinct sense that SARS is paying just a little more attention to them, to every little cent that they earn, they're going by the book, I trust, with the rest of us. But there is the sense that they really are focusing a lot of attention on squeezing every cent out of hardworking, tax-paying, saving middle-class people. You're really trying their best and are being squeezed hard. And so, yeah, there's a bit of a contrast here. People who seem to have a hell of a lot of money sloshing around, very conspicuous consumption, not embarrassed about it. It does strike one as a little bit suspicious.
And to make it even more interesting, of course, now we have this public transparency on who political parties get their money from above a certain amount. And that's those quarterly, those figures are made available by the IEC. And very often the EFF gets nothing from big donors. Maybe every now and again they get some money from a big corporate, but generally speaking, it's not much. So where is all the money coming from?
Indeed. And I mean, look at that quite impressive razzmatazz at the weekend. That must have cost a pretty penny, I would have thought.
Indeed.
So this is clearly not pocket money that's funding.
I
that
don't
lot.
normally ask for SARS to look into taxes, because I'm not a big tax guy, but I don't know. I feel like actually I would be slightly comforted if Cyril Ramaphosa had been meeting with the commissioner. But,
yes, that's the thing.
That's
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there. Let's move very briefly to our last story, and we finally have a cause for the explosion of formerly known as Bree Street in Johannesburg, where the street blew up and killed someone, and thankfully no one else was killed, although a lot of people were injured. It's been 2 weeks. It's a bit slow to get the news, but it looks like there was a methane gas explosion, possibly caused by methane leaking from old underground tunnels which litter Johannesburg. These tunnels were opened up apparently by a minor earthquake, which we'd had a few weeks before that. And one of the reasons that the explosion happened was apparently because all of the manhole covers had been welded down to prevent access to the cable lines underneath and prevent cable theft. It's kind of a tale of modern South Africa, don't you think?
Very, very. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of graphic, very grim illustration of the consequences of the kinds of things that the society has, essentially tolerated. We've tolerated a government for 30 years whose crime fighting and efforts to stop cable theft and metal theft and the illegal metal trade have been woefully insufficient.
Yes.
And criminals have been encouraged. Criminality is perceived to be something you can get away with without consequences. And then you have, desperate measures such as the welding down of these things, and which then, manifest in
unusual ways.
Very unusual ways.
I don't think anyone saw this coming. I wouldn't be surprised if there was perhaps some more bad governance reasons for this on top of this that we have yet to learn. But still, clearly I think that it's yet another stress that we're undergoing from the difficulties with bad management, with bad governance. But that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. And all I can say is that's a wrap.